Hi guys, and welcome back to these lessons on America for your GCSE. So today we're going to look at prohibition. So a really fun topic to start with. So at midnight on the 16th of January 1920, a new law was introduced in America. Seconds later, millions of people were breaking it and would continue to break it until it was repealed, which means ended, in 1933. What on earth could this law be? I'm going to start with some key words that you're going to need to know before I tell you about what prohibition was at this point in time. But let's start at the beginning. So, prohibition actually means the action of forbidding something, especially by law. It's come to be known in this context as just meaning the forbidding of alcohol in America in 1920s. Actually, it could mean the forbidding of anything. So, just something interesting to know there. Now, a speakeasy. So a speakeasy is an illicit liquor shop or drinking club. And what happened was these would pop up often underground as kind of secret bars, secret nightclubs, secret drinking locations. Liquor is obviously alcohol, especially distilled spirits. Bootleggers. Now, bootleggers are people who make, distribute, or sell goods illegally, and in this context it's alcohol that we're talking about. So they're making alcohol themselves, or they are distributing it, selling it, passing it on between the maker, the producer, and the party that wants to purchase it. Illegal, contrary, or forbidden by law, and moonshine was the name for the illegally distilled or smuggled alcohol. Now, often moonshine was made out in the countryside and then it was smuggled into the cities by bootleggers who would then sell it on for profit. Now, prohibition, what actually is it? So, on the 17th of January 1920, a new law was passed in America. Now, this prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquor above 0.5%. This law was known as the Volstead Act, which carried out the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution. It's very important you understand the difference. The 18th Amendment is the name for it in terms of it's the 18th change to the US Constitution. That's why the banning of slavery or making the freeing of all slaves in America is known as the 13th Amendment. The Volstead Act is the name for the actual piece of legislation that was passed. Interestingly, 33 states had already set limits on alcohol at this point. The law in January simply made this nationwide. Okay, so I wonder why actually at this time so many people in America are calling for the end of alcohol drinking. And here's the reasons. So there are four main reasons. Now, the first one, this was put forward by the Women's Christian Temperance Union, a religious group that wanted people to practice temperance, not drinking alcohol. These women were devoted to social reform and perceived alcohol as a cause of larger social problems and personal weakness. They wanted to alleviate poverty through abstinence. Remember, there were 6 million families below $1,000 at this time income. Spending money on alcohol right now is really not a priority. They also claimed that 3,000 infants were smothered every year by drunken parents and emphasized the immorality that was spreading through the cities. Now, the second reason was presented by the Anti-Saloon League, an organization also for temperance, which had strong support in the South and rural North. It was supported by Protestant ministers from Methodist and Baptist backgrounds and became a powerful prohibition lobbying party in America, mostly acting for a Republican audience. It worked alongside, quite controversially, the KKK, and it was commented at the time that in Alabama, it's hard to tell where the Anti-Saloon League ends and the Klan begins. Now, a third pressure group were the industrialists, who claimed workers would be more effective and efficient if they did not drink. They also linked the public's fear of communism into their argument by claiming Bolshevism thrived on drink and lawlessness. So, people who are getting drunk might be susceptible to communism and inciting the red fear into people's hearts to get them behind the cause. Now, finally, during World War I, feelings of xenophobia and anti-German feeling were rife, obviously, as they were the opponent during the war. And German immigrants in the United States had previously dominated in the beer industry. They had founded thousands of breweries, such as Miller Coors and Anheuser-Busch. Therefore, to stop drinking alcohol was to help the war effort, to prevent these German families, German communities getting any money. Okay, now sometimes those that supported prohibition were labeled dries and those that didn't were labeled wet. Okay, so we have two different phrases. If you see that in your exam, that's what it means. Now, how did they enforce prohibition? Now, it's very difficult to enforce prohibition, as proven by the fact that it was one of the most broken pieces of legislation ever put into force. The first kind of main category I'm going to go through is that it was difficult to prevent people from disobeying the law. First of all, people ignored the law. There were 200,000 speakeasies in the USA, 30,000 of which were in New York alone. There were also not enough agents. There were only 1,500 agents, or we called probies, who were poorly paid. A famous agent was Isidore Einstein, who carried a hip flask in his pocket filled with alcohol. Agents were poorly paid, and there were roughly 75,000 people per agent. Now, many Americans were making their own moonshine, of which 5,000 people died per year. An interesting example, in Chicago, a chemist tested 341 samples and found kerosene, nicotine, iodine, sulfuric acid, and soap in these alcohol moonshine samples. 1 in 6 was found to have a serious threat to health. So people are just drinking anyway. They don't really care that we have prohibition. They're getting hold of alcohol through other routes. Another reason is that the USA was just an extremely vast country, 3,000 miles of border between Mexico and Canada, where you can smuggle alcohol through. So by 1930, there were 3,000 agents for the 18,600 mile border. A famous smuggler was Captain McCoy. And finally, we have arrests for drinking offences, which show the amount of people breaking the law, which then prove how it just wasn't a priority at the time. So there were more arrests for drinking offences in 1925 than in 1921. In 1921, there were 494 drunk driving offences, and in 1925, there were 820. So that's almost double, which shows that people just are completely disregarding the law because everyone is still getting drunk. Now, prohibition was not a priority for government spending. Most states spent 8 times less on enforcing this than enforcing fish and game laws, okay? So it just wasn't where the government were putting their money. Now, another big category as to why prohibition failed was corruption. So we have the role of gangsters like Al Capone, who also controlled the supply of alcohol. Local government officials took bribes, which meant speakeasies didn't get shut down. The average speakeasy at the time was paying $400 a month to the police. Many prohibition agents accepted bribes to turn a blind eye, and the government were losing $500 million a year in taxes. So even for the government, it was not a very attractive option. All right, what you need to do is we're going to stop there in terms of prohibition. If you want to find out the role of organized crime in prohibition, and if you want to find out how prohibition ended, you need to go and watch my next video on organized crime.